Hello again and welcome back. I'm McSnazzi and today we are back in City Skylines for another video in our new Grand Haven series. But before we get into that, please consider subscribing down below. It's completely free and it really does help out the channel. Now to get into this episode, I wanted to do quite a few things to sort of expand this suburbs town that we've been working on since last episode of the series. And what I wanted to do was expand the neighborhood a little bit, sort of get some boundaries, and I want to go up to the highway. So we at least sort of get this area sort of sorted out so then we can expand this little suburb town from there. What I end up doing in this episode is we built a middle school and an elementary school, kind of what I mentioned in the last episode. No, we are not doing industry in this episode, as I also kind of mentioned of what potentially episode 3 could be. But, you know, that's just how it goes sometimes. You just get inspiration to do other things. But we do a couple schools, an elementary and a middle school, build a little area for them with like a football field, a baseball field, the typical things you'd see for associated with like a middle school or elementary school. And we also build a park, finish up a little bit more of the suburb neighborhood here, and we add a little bit more to the commercial strip up here at the beginning of the town. And as you can see, that is exactly what we're working on the screen right now. What I wanted to do, or what I want to do in general for this little commercial area strip at the beginning of this suburb town, is I want to do a lot of what you'd see in real life suburban America. So a lot of the sort of companies or like commercial buildings are set a little farther from the road. There's parking lots in front of each of them, and that's what I'm trying to do with these two buildings that you can see on the screen right now. In City Skylines, they don't really do a lot of that parking lot stuff. Pretty much all the buildings are built right on the road, even the commercial buildings, and it's not as realistic as it is in real life. So I wanted to sort of go for that feel, and I think I'll go for that feel as I continue making more commercial areas in these suburbs going forward in the series. Now, I get it, in the downtown, there's not really any of this happening. The places, the commercial buildings are built right on the street. And that makes sense when you're talking about very dense downtown cities. But when we're talking about building like realistic suburbs here, it doesn't really make sense to have all the commercial buildings right on the edge. This little marketplace, whatever building, kind of looks like a CVS. That's kind of why I put it on the corner there. Works on the corner because it can sit on the corner. These other buildings look a lot better when we push them back a little bit from the road, put a parking lot in front of them. And I think that's what I'll continue on doing. And I just wanted to mention that a little bit, sort of a little aspect I wanted to do to make it look a little more realistic for these commercial strips as I'm finishing up detailing all of this front area here before we move back to work on the actual neighborhood and the school. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to change the police stations episode, kind of what I mentioned last episode. I did get an asset for this, and I also have the new assets for what we are putting in the middle school and the elementary school. I have an asset for each of those. They'll be down in the assets and mods collection in the description below of this video. It should be updated by the time this video comes out, and you'll be able to use these assets for yourself if you are interested. But before we get into building the whole school area, we are doing a little bit more foliage work on that tree line there, sort of the fence line that separates commercial from residential. When I've been driving around in like real life a little more lately, I've been trying to like look at, you know, the separation between commercial and residential areas, at least where I live, and there's a lot of trees, like big swaths of trees that are very dense but in like a sort of thin line that kind of helps separate all these areas. So that's what I tried to do there, and I'll show it a little more in the live portion. But here we're going to start working on the school area. I want to go for like a sort of big school area. If you look on schools in, you know, Google Earth or Google Maps, at least all the ones that I am familiar with, there is this sort of like area set out for them, and there's big parking lots, big school, there'll be sports fields, a playground, stuff like that, but then it'll be fenced in from there, and it's kind of more open and kind of not like super efficient space wise. Like there's a big area taken up by these schools, and there's like a bus drive and stuff like that. And one thing I didn't do is make a little bus lot for the buses, but maybe we'll do that when we build the high school for this area, so then it kind of all works together. Maybe the buses go to the high school at the end of the day or something. just to add a little bit to the realism. But what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to build this like area set out just for the school, and I'm going to put the middle school and the elementary school in the same sort of area. I think it works out for what we're trying to do here. And here's me trying to figure out how to put this. This has changed a little bit, but I put a little parking lot in between them. But at the front of each of them, I make this sort of, I use the parking lot piece that is in the asset collection, of course, but I make it sort of like a bus lane where I only put parking slots or parking spaces on the one side away from the front door of the school. So there's sort of like a bus lane sort of thing for buses to drop students off, stuff like that, to add a little bit more to the realism. And we'll only really be looking at this above from here on out after this episode, but I wanted to add a little bit of that realism. I think I'll be doing that going forward in the series, just little touches of realism here and there. So here we're going to add a baseball diamond, and it really does look a lot better than what a middle school should necessarily have, but you know, going through the assets, there's not a ton to choose from, so that this worked out in the end. It's not super over the top like an actual like MLB baseball stadium, but it does look like it could work for like a school setting, more like a college setting. But this football field right here is perfect for the setting and scale we're trying to go for a middle school or a high school. I'll probably reuse it at the high school as well, and it even has like a little logo on the field too. I really like this asset, so you guys can see that in the asset collection down below to use it in your own builds, but I think it's very realistic of, you know, suburban schools in the US to have like a football field like that. Now I'm just going to end up fencing off the entire school area, sort of what I was talking about before. We're going to add a little bit more trees to make it better, and I'm going to add a sign off camera to the front of this middle school to sort of add even more, and we're going to put a little bit of a logo on there too. And that's pretty much it for this school area, and then we're going to jump to finishing off a little bit more of the neighborhood here. So we're going to have the neighborhood in this area go right up to the school, and this is something that I think is pretty realistic aspect of sort of a neighborhood. And a lot of these schools, schools that I didn't even attend or schools in the area, I've been doing a lot of looking on Google Earth to see kind of inspiration for suburb towns in, you know, sort of the area that I'm kind of basing this off of. And really what I tend to find is a lot of these schools are like tucked back in neighborhoods. So there'll be like a main strip where there's like a main road of like a town, and then there'll be a neighborhood. You can go into the neighborhood, and then back in these neighborhoods tucked in these elementary schools and middle schools. And I find that very fascinating because I think it's an interesting aspect to do, because in City Skylines you kind of just think, hey, you just put the school on like a main road, but typically in real life, at least for these suburb towns, before we even get into the downtown where I'm sure it's a lot different, but a lot of these suburban US towns, there's these schools that are tucked way back in the neighborhood. So that's kind of what I wanted to do here, and I think it looks super nice in the end. This whole area is turning out really well, better than I thought it would, and it's kind of tucking up right next to the interstate, which is perfect because that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's going to fill out this area over here, and it really does look like a realistic suburb of a big city. So I'm really happy with how it's looking, and we'll talk more about that in the live portion. But here we're going to start making the little park. And I did mention this in last episode that I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with this little area behind the neighborhood. I didn't know if I was going to add another street or two of houses, but I thought a nice thing to put here is a little park next to the highway, because when you get close to the highway, you get a little bit more limited of what you really want to do. You kind of run out of space of what exactly you want to put in. So I thought making a park would probably be the best use of this space. And I've seen this before in real life. At least I've seen parks that are pretty close to highways when there's like a bridge or like an interstate exit. I've seen parks built next to these areas, and I think it worked well with what we wanted to do here. We're just going to put a few trails through the woods here next to these trees, and we're going to make it a lot more wooded, so it's kind of like a little bit more discreet. So there's a little bit of privacy when you're there. It kind of drowns out the noise of the highway. but it's all for show and it looks really good from above, so that's really what matters because we're not going to be spending a ton of time in this sort of suburb town anyway. Here I'm going to put a little sound barrier as well to kind of block out the sound if you are in the park, so a little bit more of a realistic aspect as well. Kind of blocks out the sound from the neighborhood as well. And this park's kind of a buffer for the neighborhood too. Sort of drowns out the sound of the highway and sort of the negativity of living right next to a highway, even though it does happen. You know, you look on Google Earth or Google Maps and you see there are neighborhoods and homes right up next to highways, and it is a realistic thing, especially when you're this close to a big city that we're going to be building soon in this series. It does make sense that land is sort of at a premium and you kind of just build wherever you can, even if it is right next to the highway. So for this, even though it's sort of a suburb town, I think it does work and it does look really nice, and I'm really happy with the result of this park, even though I say I'm really happy with the result of everything. But I'm liking this episode. We did a lot in this episode. I really enjoyed how it turned out, and that gets me excited to sort of continue the series and make I don't know what exactly I'm going to do next, but I'm excited to get there because it's sort of building, and I think you can expect this amount of work in future episodes. Now that we kind of get running in the series, get our feet off the ground, and we can actually do a lot in episodes. And I'm not sure where I'm going to expand. Maybe we'll go back to the industry area. Maybe we'll start the downtown next episode. Maybe we'll finish up this sort of suburb town. I'm not sure. And that's what's exciting about it. But this little suburb town that I'm going to name Cornet, as you can see right there, is looking great. But we're going to jump into the live portion in just a second, where we're going to walk around the finished build. I added a little bit of finishing touches off camera that I'll talk about, and then maybe we'll talk about what exactly we're going to do next in this series. So I'll see you guys there in a second. Alright everybody, welcome back to the live portion of the episode, and here we're going to take a look at what we've done, and it's really grown a lot since last episode. If you take the thumbnail from last episode and sort of put it against the thumbnail of this episode, if this is going to be the thumbnail shot, I'm not quite sure yet, but it's grown a lot. Last episode we kind of stopped right here and we just had these little roads going along with houses along here. We've kind of added and expanded from that with this little commercial strip, roads going this way, a whole school, some more neighborhood, and of course the park. I'm really happy with the results of this episode, and I hope you guys are too. So let's jump into it. The views of this area just look great now. It looks like a very realistic neighborhood with the school in the back. I'm thinking this may be more of the high industrial road, not really industrial, but the higher density road to get to the school that people will use, as opposed to maybe this one as well. Sort of to get to the park too, but I may upgrade these roads. I'm not entirely sure if that's very realistic to do something like that, but they may be a 2-lane road going this way if we sort of have a traffic problem, which I'm assuming we necessarily shouldn't because of the way the roads are laid out. There's ways for people to get everywhere. But here is the finished product of the school. It looks great over here as well. Really happy with the result. We have this middle school up front and then sort of the elementary school in the back. Even though the elementary school is a little bigger, it's not as many stories as the middle school. It was hard to find assets that looked very realistic for the schools, at least like an American suburban school that I'm more familiar with and what I was going for this area. So these were probably the better ones, and you can see these in the asset collection below, and I hope you guys do use them in your builds. But we also put in this football field for some football games at this middle school, along with a baseball field that looks a lot nicer than a baseball field you'd necessarily find in sort of a middle school, but you know, it works because we have to deal with certain assets that we can use. I also put in a bathroom to both of these areas. I put one here too. That is the park bathroom that's also in the park as well. We have this sort of playground right next to the elementary school. Of course, that is definitely needed for an elementary school. A little bit of outdoor eating area as well. Not super high detail, but you know, from above it looks realistic, and I like you know, the sort of realism it adds as well. The parking lots, and these will fill up as we get more people in the city. Cars will be in here, so it'll look a little realistic. We already have one up here at this one, but It does look great, and we're going to expand out this way. The neighborhood will continue in this area, I believe. I'm going to do more houses. Maybe I'll do something interesting, potentially like a water treatment plant over here, or something of the sorts like that, just to sort of split it up. And since it's right next to the highway, it makes sense to have something like that. There's a lot of that stuff hidden in real life, so I think it's sort of something to do. Here's the little park area right next to the school, just a little tiny park with a nice little parking lot, nice playground. You can take a little walk on the nature trails. It is all fenced in as well, but I think it's just a nice quaint aspect to add next to the neighborhood. Now there was a park playground here, but I did take that out due to the fact that we put in this huge one right here, so that was taken care of. But you know, some more houses over here. I put a little one of the vanilla parks here as well, adding some trees to it and sort of the dirt paths going to each street. I think that's sort of an aspect that I liked. And this is the finished product of this episode. I really enjoy how this turned out. I think it's looking very nice, and we can take a little bit look at the commercial area up here. I added a little bit of a clinic, and I do like the vanilla asset of the Urgent Care, so I do keep this up here. And a couple commercial buildings with a realistic looking parking lot in front of it. We have sort of the CVS looking building right here, Marketplace, Best Food Service. I guess it's sort of a grocery store in this, but in my mind it looks like a CVS or like a Walgreens or something, so I think it works right there, right next to a neighborhood. Makes sense. We're gonna have to build a grocery store in one of these episodes, sort of a suburban grocery store, maybe like a big Walmart. Could be a fun build to do. I've never done something like that in City Skylines, and I've always wanted to. So maybe we'll look into doing some of that in the future. We also have this idea of making this industrial area, if you weren't here for episode 2, where we talked about that. And I also kind of want to maybe start the downtown, making this into water in a future episode, maybe a little sooner than we think. We might not complete this, might just leave that there and start doing some road layout for the downtown. It just depends on what I am inspired to do in the next one. But I'm really happy with the result of this episode. I hope you guys do like it. If you did enjoy the video, please let me know down below. Give it a like, give it a comment. Please do consider subscribing. It's free. It really does help grow the channel. We could use all the support we can get here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really did, and we'll have more of this series coming soon to the channel in the future. But until then, I'm McSnazzi, and I'll see you guys next time.